The movie begins by showing a young basketball athlete named Ray, who is very accomplished and quite popular in the National Basketball League. Ray can always perform his best throughout the season, and many people praise his basketball playing talent because his skills are quite extraordinary. Unfortunately, when Ray's name began to triumph in the national news media, he had to be involved in a scandal that was big enough to make his career in basketball that he had been struggling for instantly destroyed. In the last basketball game that Ray participated in, he was involved in a violent fight with one of the spectators on the field for no apparent reason, causing him to be removed from the match. As a result of the incident, Ray had to pay a large sum of money for the hospitalization of the spectator he had attacked. Not only that, but Ray was also kicked out of the national basketball team, and they left him to deal with the scandal on his own. From then on, Ray's almost successful life was ruined just because of one mistake he made in his last game. Ray had to accept that none of the provincial basketball teams were willing to accept him as a player since the news about his fighting scandal spread widely in the television media and national magazines. Ray could no longer continue his career in the sport that he had been passionate about since childhood and had to find another job to survive. Ray is no longer known to have parents or other relatives, so in his lowest times, he had to survive alone and take on several jobs. After quitting basketball completely, Ray worked as a parking attendant at a downtown shopping center and became an accomplice to a car thief group. Whenever Ray helped someone park their car, he secretly installed a GPS tracker in the car so the car theft group could track the car. After installing the GPS tracker, Ray would provide information about the type of car so that they could copy the target's car keys and steal the car while they were off guard. Ray was forced to commit these crimes because he had difficulty finding a well-paying job and still needed to make ends meet. That afternoon, when Ray was about to go to work, his motorcycle suddenly broke down because the engine was getting worn and old. Ray decided to go to his boss, Wu Tsuchi, to collect his monthly salary early so he could fix his motorcycle. When his boss gave him $2,000, Ray could only complain because it would not be enough to pay his rent and also his motorcycle repair costs. But Ray couldn't complain much because this month he didn't get much money from car theft. When Ray was about to leave Tsuchi's place, Tsuchi influenced him to bet his salary in a poker gambling game because Tsuchi felt that today was his lucky day. But after Ray bet his entire salary on the poker game, he lost and had to lose all his money. The frustrated Ray decided to leave the place, but Tsuchi and his men stopped Ray and forced him to hand over his watch. Ray then refused to hand over the watch because it was a very valuable object to him, but Tsuchi and his men continued to urge him and would not let him leave if he did not hand over the watch. Although Ray handed over the watch to Tsuchi in the end, Tsuchi and his gang still wanted to teach Ray a lesson because he had fought back. Ray could only surrender when Tsuchi and his gang began to beat him up so badly that he was battered and demoralized. In the middle of the fight, Ray remembered the incident when he beat up the audience at his last basketball game, which was the moment when his life began to change 180 degrees. Ray still remembers that moment because it was the beginning of all the bad luck that befell his life. The scene then switches and shows a professional thief known as the raincoat robber because the thief often commits theft on rainy days by wearing a fully covered costume ranging from a black helmet to a black raincoat suit. The raincoat robber has recently begun to unsettle the people of the city because the robber dares to commit theft during the day when everyone is still hanging around. He even dares to rob a police officer who has just taken money from a bank. After getting a bag full of hundreds of thousands of dollars, the raincoat robber immediately fled by using a car parked in an alley. However, it turned out that there was still a young woman named Kathy waiting in the passenger seat, so the raincoat robber decided to take her with him. On the other hand, Ray was going to the hospital to meet his girlfriend, Nana Lee, an intern at the hospital. When Nana looked at Ray's wrist, she was suspicious because she did not see the watch she had previously given him, and she immediately asked about the watch. Ray tried to make excuses by saying that he didn't want to wear the watch anywhere because he didn't want to lose it and chose to keep it in the house. It turns out that Ray fought so hard to keep the watch from his boss because the watch was a gift from his girlfriend. He deliberately came to see Nana because he wanted to borrow her motorcycle, considering that his motorcycle was still broken and he didn't have enough money to repair it. In the evening, Ray returned to his job as Tsuchi's accomplice to install tracking devices on every car parked in the city center. But when Ray was about to install a GPS tracker on a car, a young man came up to him and asked what he was doing to do. Ray, afraid that his actions would be discovered, became nervous and accidentally dropped the tracking device under the car. At that moment, Ray accidentally found blood splattered under the car, and after he followed the blood droplets, he saw a woman who was already unconscious and covered in blood. The man who approached Ray earlier turned out to be the man who had injured the woman, and the man immediately threatened Ray using a gun to immediately get into the car. Ray was forced to obey the man's words rather than take risks and act rashly, which could put him in danger. The dying woman turned out to be Kathy, the woman who the raincoat robber previously kidnapped, and the man who kidnapped Ray this time was the raincoat robber. The robber then asked Ray to call an ambulance so that Kathy could get immediate medical attention. After the ambulance came to pick Kathy up, the robber told Ray to come with him and then introduced himself as Wu Shunwei. Ray still doesn't know that Shun Wai is a raincoat robber who has been troubling the city with his murders and robberies. Ray thought that Shun Wai was just the one who accidentally hit Kathy and was too scared to call the ambulance directly, so he tried to negotiate with Shun Wai. Ray begged Shun Wai to let him go because he had to meet his girlfriend somewhere, and his girlfriend had been calling him ever since. Shun Wai then gave a considerable amount of money and asked Ray to accompany him on a mission. After Shun Wai promised a much bigger payout, Ray followed his request and drove him to Tzu Chi's place, where Shun Wai would buy a new car. On the way to his destination, Ray's car was suddenly stopped by several traffic police officers conducting a trafficking raid. Initially, everything was still going well because one of the police officers recognized Ray. However, the police officer's colleague still wanted to check the trunk of Ray's car. At the same time, Shun Wai realized that inside the trunk of the car, Kathy's blood was still splattered because they had not had time to clean up the blood spots. Therefore, Shun Wai immediately gave the code to Ray and forced him to step on the gas pedal until they hit one of the police officers who was guarding the front of the car. When Ray and Shun Wai arrive at Tzu Chi's place, Ray immediately takes Shun Wai to Tzu Chi's office so that he can immediately complete his business. It turned out that Shun Wai's goal of going to see Tzu Chi was not only to buy a car but also to invite Tzu Chi to cooperate in money laundering. Knowing that he would get a lot of profit, Tzu Chi agreed to do the money laundering collaboration, and Ray, who did not know anything, nodded happily because soon he would get a large enough payment. After Ray saw the news about the robbery and murder committed by the raincoat robbers on television, he finally realized that Shun Wai was the raincoat robber who the police had hunted. Ray, who hates dealing with the police, immediately scolded Shun Wai because he didn't tell him about it from the start. Moreover, Tzu Chi was also not a criminal who had close connections with the police, so he could have cancelled this deal if he had found out that Shun Wai was the most wanted fugitive in the city. Tzu Chi would not risk getting involved with a wanted man like Shun Wai because it would expose the car theft business he had been running to the police. After Ray told Tzu Chi who Shun Wai was, Tzu Chi met with Shun Wai and decided to cancel their deal. Before Ray left Tzu Chi's place, Tzu Chi immediately ordered his men to beat him because Ray's innocence had caused many problems for their business. As Tzu Chi's men ganged up on Ray, Ray tried to fight back, and unexpectedly, Shun Wai returned to help Ray escape. Shun Wai could easily defeat Tzu Chi and his men, while Ray, who was not good at fighting, had to resign himself to being the target of punches from Tzu Chi's men. After Ray took some car keys from Tzu Chi's office, he tried to match the keys to one of the cars, and after finding the right key, he rushed to leave the place using the stolen car. When Ray thought he had managed to get free from the thugs' pursuit, he was suddenly surprised by the appearance of Shun Wai, who was already in the car that he was driving. After Ray got involved with Shun Wai and helped him escape from the police, many people thought that Ray was the raincoat robber who had been terrorizing the city. What's more, Ray is known to have driven the car owned by Shun Wai during the inspection raid conducted by the traffic police the other day. The police who had seen Ray on the day of the incident also suspected that Ray was the raincoat robber, but the police captain named Oscar Lin still thought Ray was not the raincoat robber. The next night, Ray and Shun Wai planned to return to the Tzu Chi headquarters because Shun Wai's robbery money was still left there. On the other hand, Officer Lin and the head of the investigation named Chen Mu came to Kathy in the hospital to ask her some questions about the perpetrators of the bank robbery the other day. However, Kathy, who had just regained consciousness from fainting, claimed that she did not remember anything about the events of that day. Officer Chen Mu also asked Kathy to provide any information that she remembered about the perpetrator of the robbery. Officer Lin asked if the robber was a former basketball player named Ray Liao, but Kathy admitted that she did not recognize Ray. Kathy only remembered that after the bank robbers kidnapped her, she was hit with a wooden beam until she lost consciousness. She vaguely remembers that a young man carried her and that he left after she called an ambulance at the scene. Later that evening, Ray took Shun Wai to a restaurant frequented by Tzu Chi to meet him and ask for Shun Wai's looted money. Initially, Ray and Shun Wai thought that they would be able to intimidate Tzu Chi at that place, but it turned out that the restaurant was Tzu Chi's restaurant, and some of his men were also guarding the place. As a result, the fight between Ray and Shun Wai against Tzu Chi's gang ensued again, and the opponents they had to face this time were even stronger. But fortunately, after Ray and Shun Wai struggled to defeat Tzu Chi's men one by one, the two finally managed to escape from the place along with the bag of money that Shun Wai had previously left behind. After they got the money they were after, Shun Wai invited Ray to have dinner at a noodle shop that he used to frequent. It was then that Ray finally found out from the news on television that the police had now accused him of being a raincoat robber, and it made him even more panicked and frustrated with his life full of bad luck. Ray immediately blames Shun Wai for involving him in such a big problem. Even though he is not a violent criminal like Shun Wai, he is forced to take responsibility for a crime he never committed. Shun Wai, however, immediately denied this and argued that all of this could have happened because Ray had a criminal record with the police as an abuser, which made the police even more convinced that he was the perpetrator of the robbery. Shun Wai also said that Ray wouldn't be able to change society's bad view of a person because everyone who has committed a crime will always be seen as a bad person. But Ray had had enough of all Shun Wai's nonsense and decided to leave him. The next day, Ray went to see Nana secretly to tell her that he was neither a robber nor a murderer. But Nana couldn't trust Ray anymore and asked him to come with her to the police station to turn himself in so that he could get a reduced sentence. Ray was very disappointed that the person he loved the most didn't trust him anymore. Ray refused to go to the police and said he would try to solve all these problems in his way. Meanwhile, Officer Lin returned to Kathy at the hospital to deliver an important piece of information to her. At the police headquarters, Officer Lin received the GPS tracking device that Officer Chen Mu found in Ray's apartment. Officer Chen Mu has also heard Ray's confession through a phone call, so Officer Chen Mu is even more convinced that Ray is the raincoat robber. Officer Lin felt that the evidence was insufficient to prove that Ray was the raincoat robber, but Officer Chen Mu had already mobilized his team to arrest Ray. Officer Lin knew that Ray had only contacted them to testify and give clues about the real raincoat robber, but apparently, Officer Chen Mu twisted the statement. The next day, Ray met Officer Chen Mu because he wanted to invite Ray to make a statement at the police station. But Ray was still too scared to trust anyone, and he didn't want to be framed by the police to confess to being the real culprit. But it turned out that it was just a trick made by Officer Chen Mu to catch Ray, where at that time several police officers had been deployed to surround the area. When Ray realized this, he immediately rushed to escape from the place through the emergency stairs in the building. When a police officer almost caught him, Ray, who panicked, immediately smothered the officer's mouth until the officer fainted. After that, Ray immediately left the building and fled the place. After the incident, Captain Lin scolded Officer Chen Mu for conducting the arrest operation without his permission. Later that night, Ray tried to call Nana for help, but Nana again asked Ray to turn himself into the police, so he immediately hung up. After that, Nana went to Kathy's room to ask what happened because she did not believe that Ray was a murderer, but Kathy did not want to say anything and remained silent. Ray then went to meet Shun Wai at his regular noodle restaurant, and he was forced to follow Shun Wai because he had no one to help him. While they were going somewhere, Shun Wai and Ray told each other about why they committed the crime. Shun Wai revealed that he deliberately committed robberies and murders around the bank because he had a grudge against the bank that had fired him from the security staff of the money transport car. Upon their arrival at the docks, Shun Wai invites Ray to join him in his bank robbery plan, and Ray agrees to help Shun Wai given that everyone now considers him a criminal. Before laying out their plan, Shun Wai asks Ray to remember one important thing: he never forced him to become a raincoat robber, and he did all this voluntarily. The following night, Shun Wai and Ray began planning the bank robbery they would carry out at Shun Wai's hideout. After their robbery plan had been neatly organized, Shun Wai and Ray returned to Tzu Chi to invite him to work together to carry out the robbery, and Shun Wai promised to give half of the money from their robbery. After learning that the amount of money they would rob was quite large, Tzu Chi accepted the offer and agreed to carry out the robbery together. At the same time, a recovering Kathy was finally discharged from the hospital, and before she left, she went to see Nana say something about Ray. On the way to the bank they were targeting, Shun Wai watched video footage of Ray beating a male spectator in the audience. It turned out that Ray had beaten the young man so aggressively because the young man had hurt Nana. When they arrived at their destination, Shun Wai immediately put on the black helmet that he always carried and immediately started the robbery. At the same time, the police had also received a report from someone about the robbery, and they immediately rushed to the place. The scene back to Ray and Shun Wai, who have managed to get several bags of money and put the loot into their car. But as Ray turns around, Shun Wai suddenly points a gun at him and threatens him to confess to being the raincoat robber. Shun Wai also said that he kidnapped Nana and would kill her if Ray didn't do what he said. Ray did not expect that Shun Wai would betray him and make him a scapegoat for all the crimes he committed. When Shun Wai was about to escape from the place, Captain Lin suddenly appeared and immediately ambushed him. Captain Lin immediately asked the car driver to get out of the car. Unexpectedly, the person who was the driver was Kathy, and it turned out that Kathy had been Shun Wai's accomplice who had conspired to frame Ray. When Captain Lin was caught off guard, Shun Wai immediately used the opportunity to shoot Captain Lin and then invited Kathy to escape from the place. They both left Ray behind because, from the beginning, they both wanted to use Ray as a scapegoat for all the crimes they committed. A few days later, Shun Wai came to meet the boss of Tzu Chi to do a money laundering transaction as they had agreed before. However, Tzu Chi's man Kuro had been arrested by the police at the car theft headquarters, and he had given some information to the police that the real raincoat robber was a man named Shun Wai. After knowing that, Officer Chen Mu and several other police officers began searching for Shun Wai's location using the GPS tracking device in Ray's car. After all, they suspected that Shun Wai was currently with Ray. The scene back to Shun Wai, who had just done a money laundering deal with Tzu Chi, and he looked shocked after finding out that Tzu Chi didn't give him the amount of money that they had agreed on. Tzu Chi said that Shun Wai only received a very small fee because Ray had taken most of it. It turned out that all this time, Ray had only been pretending to be innocent in front of Shun-Wai, and Ray had worked with Tzu Chi to be able to steal Shun-Wai's money. As a result, a fight between Shun-Wai and Ray ensued, and during the fight, they continued to blame each other. At the end of the fight, Shun-Wai managed to get Ray cornered, and he immediately pushed him off the balcony until Ray fell on a car. But it turned out that Ray could still survive the accident, and he got back up to ask where Shun-Wai had kept Nana. Shun-Wai immediately threw a room key to Ray and told him that Nana had been kept in a room on the 3rd floor. Shun-Wai left the badly injured Ray with all the money in Ray's bag. Unbeknownst to Shun-Wai, Ray had found a tracking device under his car and had secretly attached the GPS tracking device to Shun-Wai's shirt collar. After searching various rooms, Ray finally managed to find Nana's location, and he was relieved to find out that she was still okay. Afterward, Nana decides to take Ray to another city so that he can start a new life in that place until the situation becomes better. Meanwhile, Shun-Wai and Kathy, who thought they had managed to escape with a lot of money, finally realized that someone had installed a tracking device on Shun-Wai's collar. Now there were several police officers following them from behind. The movie closes with a scene where Ray is smiling with satisfaction after he managed to play Shun-Wai, and he can only laugh after realizing that Ray has managed to win the game. The moral message we can learn from this movie is not to easily entrust your fate to others, even people you consider to be very good people, because basically, we will never know who will betray us.